Hi everyone, welcome back to my channel and welcome to my best books of 2024 video. I can't believe I'm actually doing this. It is quite overwhelming, and that is kind of why I'm so late with this, because I want to do it right. Last year I only started being consistent on YouTube after all of the last year's videos went up, so I didn't really do a 2023 video like this with my best books of 2023, and I'm kind of sad about it because I had read a lot of good books that year, but that just means I'm even more excited to tell you about all the great books that I read last year and just my reading journey in general. So before going into all the books that I want to recommend you because they're amazing, I just quickly want to go into how I chose those books, but also kind of what I learned throughout the year about my reading taste. So get yourself some cozy drink, maybe light a little candle like I did. I have a huge stack here and on the floor that I want to talk to you guys about. Now, the way I went about putting my favorites list together might differ from how other people do theirs. For me, there are books on here that had 4 stars, 4.5 stars, and 5 stars. So you might think, oh, you didn't have enough 5 stars to fill up the list. No, I did. I had lots of great reads last year, and why maybe a 5-star was bumped off the list for a 4-star. So one reason might be that the 5-star was the perfect read in that moment. I enjoyed it immensely. It was the right read for the right time. I didn't find anything technically wrong with the book, so it was a perfect read, like the perfect book in that genre, or a perfect way to plot said story. And so I'm very grateful that I read it at that time, but maybe it's not something that I would revisit anytime soon. Maybe it's just a genre that I don't gravitate towards, so it was great that I read it and I see the appeal of it, but it's not one of my all-time favorites that if people were to ask me, I would automatically think of that one. Maybe I don't really remember most of the plot. That happens a lot, which is why I reread a lot of like series and stuff, because I don't always remember all the details or even some of the details. So some books I loved and I remember the feeling that I had while I was reading it. Maybe it made me giddy, maybe it made me happy, but in the end I couldn't really tell you anything about the book except my feelings towards it. I couldn't tell you anything about the plot or like what exactly made me giddy or happy. So those are not on my list, sorry to say. I am hoping to bring you more reviews over time, over the year, so that doesn't really happen at the end of the year. So you're not like, these are your 5 stars, but why? I'm hoping to remedy that by just talking about them in general throughout the year. Talking about rereads, that might also be a reason why something was chosen for this list, because all of the books that I want to mention later on, like on my official best of list, all of those books I want to revisit for some reason or another. And not just because I can't remember anything about it, but because I remember and because I want to be back there in that world, in that moment, in that reading experience. Just something about them made me keep them in my mind, even if they're not the perfect 5-star read for me in that moment. So maybe on reread they would become a 5-star. And if not, that's still totally fine. For me, anything above a 4 is an amazing book recommendation. So another reason why something might be a 4 might be because in that moment I didn't exactly find it to be the perfect read. Maybe something like 1 or 2 plot points were not to my liking, or maybe I didn't find it accessible in the beginning and I had to like wait a while for the read to become like a favorite. Sometimes only the ending made all of it make sense. So the reading experience was a bit tumultuous, but in the end I really enjoyed the read. So all of that is to say that even though maybe something wasn't the perfect read at the moment, it is still on my mind and can still like land on my best of list. But before going into all of those books, I quickly want to mention some things that I learned about myself and my reading taste throughout the year because of some books, and I will just hold them up and maybe say a couple of things. I will not go into all of the synopses of these books, but just why that makes sense for me going forward into choosing some of these books. For example, I mentioned emotions before, so maybe I get mad at a book, like really mad, and that does not always happen. Even if there is like something traumatic happening in the book or something, it might make me like invested into the book, but it doesn't make me mad. Now I had 2 books that made me really mad this year, and that was Yellowface and also Bright Young Women. Both of these were amazing. Both of these are not to everyone's liking, I think, but for me, just the visceral reaction that I had to both of these reads was something that I remembered and that I will think about going forward, picking books that might get this reaction of me. But at the same time, I know I can't just read books like that. Those are far and few between, because I can't go to that level of emotion with every book, because that would just crumble my soul. Which is also why I noticed that I do enjoy cozy crime more than the usual like crime solving thing, but I do need amazing like characters, and it mostly has to have like a very humorous aspect to it, because there is like a lot of cozy crime going around right now that just isn't hitting the right spot for me. Speaking of cozy, I do noticed that I picked up more cozy fantasy. Again, they do need to have some plot. It can't just meander on with nothing to go on, and the characters are vital for these kinds of books. So there is going to be another cozy fantasy on my best of list. Later in the year, I noticed that I do like genre blends and alternate realities. So anything where something historically was altered to our reality and we see kind of the outcome of it and how that affected humanity and the world politics. I love that. Especially if the genre blend is with like a little bit of spooky horror-esque or fantasy. Love those. And for example, with this one, you don't only have like a genre blend of historical plus fantasy, you also have like a murder mystery in it. It's a trifecta. Very entertaining. I noticed as well that I still enjoy a big cast of characters, but again, they need to have that kind of chemistry that you're looking for. You kind of need the banter, you need different kinds of couples that may come together throughout the series, and it also does need this overall plot. If it's kind of like a heist situation where they all have to come together from different backgrounds in order to work together, love it. I noticed that I read a lot more Asian inspired mythology and retellings, especially Chinese, Korean, all that good stuff. So I really love that different POV of retellings. Like for years, all of the retellings that we got were from Western culture, and I still love those. But there's just something about those narratives and those writing styles that differ so much from Western culture that I really enjoy. And you might see some of them later on in my best of list. I also learned that I can still be surprised by books that I wouldn't have thought were favorites of mine. For example, like with If I Have to Be Haunted, I had like a thought in my mind of where this was gonna go, but I was totally surprised not only by the plot and the way that they went on a journey together instead of just having the supernatural plot. But again, that might also be because of the different inspiration behind the magical aspect of this. But I also really enjoyed the banter and the characters in this. So I do have to remember that even though maybe I think I know what I like in, for example, YA fantasy, like urban fantasy, I might get surprised and I just need to try some things. Even if I end up DNFing, that would be fine, but maybe I will continue and enjoy it so much. Speaking of being surprised, I also try to go and read very old veterans on my shelves. It's something that I will continue doing going forward this year. One that surprised me the most was this advanced reader copy that I got in 2019 of Fate of the Fallen by Cal Cade. I still need to continue with the series, but I just had a lot of fun with this, with the chosen trope. This really surprised me because I had heard mixed things, but I just went into it because this cover and just the synopsis of this had me very intrigued, and it prevailed. It was a really good read, and I can't wait to get back into this kind of story. Which also means I might like the trope where like the chosen one is like put on its head and you kind of have to go from this very known trope to something new. Talking about Asian inspiration but also genre blend, I really enjoyed Immortal Longing for that aspect. We learn in the end by the author's note that this is based on an actual city that was walled off, and you kind of have this immaculate setting in this one where you kind of know just how closed off it is and how nobody can escape and everybody kind of needs to survive in this environment. But I also like the kind of science fiction, fantasy-esque magic system that is driving the plot forward in this one. So I kind of like that whole, again, genre blend and kind of intricate background on a plot that is well known. Because it's kind of like horror games, right? But I just like the nuance behind it. Now let's go into my best of certain categories, like for example my favorite reread of last year, so things that I've read before but I revisited last year. And I have 3 books. I couldn't really choose, so there is like a reason behind why I want to talk about these for a quick second. I loved my reread of The Lord of the Rings. This felt kind of like reading it for the first time because it has been like multiple decades since I read it the first time, and I read it in German the first time. This was the first time I read all 3 books in this trilogy in English, and I really enjoyed it. I enjoyed it more than I thought I would. Speaking of revisiting something years later, I reread Bitter Blue by Kristen Cashore, and again it just felt like reading it for the first time. I didn't remember much of this, and having these amazing characters, this cast of so many people that I fell in love with during the first books of the series and just got to revisit. I adore this author and the way that she writes these stories. And lastly, this holds a very special spot in my heart. This has been a recent read, and so my reread of it was very like soon after I read it the first time, and that is Kika Hatsupulu's Threads That Bind. I love this book, and I am so glad that I got to do like a read along for this. I think it was in May when I did this, and so I was so happy that I found other people who are reading it for the first time with me, and then hopefully continued on with the series as the sequel came out last year. And I'm just so happy that I got to not only reread this but also enjoy it with others, and also get the satisfaction of saying it is as good as I remember. Speaking of sequels coming out, I was not only so excited to read the sequel of this, but it was an amazing sequel. It was one of the best that I read this year, maybe the best. I also enjoyed the sequel Ruthless Vows by Rebecca Ross. This was the perfect ending. Like with the sequel to Threads That Bind, this was a perfect conclusion. Both made me realize that I also like duologies. So with both of these, I love that we got to spend a bit more time with the characters, but also that there was a conclusion, that it doesn't drag like with some of the trilogies. My favorite German book that came out last year was Die Himmelsrichtung by Jo Ländle. I was going into this just being intrigued about Amelia Earhart and her story, but stayed and loved this book and keep recommending it now because it is such a unique way of telling the story, because we start with her last flight and then we get her story told backwards, so we always go a bit back in time. We see what she has accomplished, and then we go back and see the hurdles that she had to overcome in order to become someone so well known and so amazing a person. And my favorite translation was Rosa by Anne Catherine Bowman. With this, the cover drew me in. I just had to read it. It is such a beautiful cover, and it's a story about a young woman who is lost in her own kind of living situation, and she thinks that she knows what she wants, meaning that she just wants to go from job to job and only hanging on to her one friend. But then her friendship kind of crumbles and changes, and she notices that she does have maybe a reason to stay at her current job in an aquarium. The writing style is beautiful. There's like this parallel between the caged animal and also her life, and I was so emotional. Even though it's a very short book, it just got me right in the heart. I was not reading a lot of middle grade this year. I read some, not a lot, but my favorite by far was No One Leaves the Castle by Christopher Haley, and I had so much fun with it. The plot is something went missing in this castle, and now they need to find like a great detective in order to find it again. And they heard so much great things about this one bounty hunter, so they asked them to come in. What they didn't know is that it's actually a young girl who only spread the rumor that she's amazing, but she has no real experience. I loved it. I loved the characters. I liked the outcome of it, like the reasoning behind everything, and I actually do hope to finally get a physical copy of this so that I can reread it. I hope all of that made sense. This was basically me trying to show you lots of books that I enjoyed. They were kind of my honorable mentions, so maybe take the ones that I showed you as recommendations as well. But let's get into the books that I really want to talk about, my best of 2024, and I think I have 14 spots. But I think it's 16 books in total because some of them are series that I just put together in one spot. These are kind of in order of least to favorite, but some of these spots are interchangeable. Just maybe like the first 4 or 5 spots are really like the best, but I will tell you once I get to them. So right off the get-go, I'm going to start with a series, and what I loved about this was that it made me want to binge series again, because I was so happy that I could go from the first book into the next book almost right away, because the sequel came out last year and I finally got to read God Killer, and then I read Sunbringer by Hannah Kanna, and I really enjoyed these. I do think that I enjoyed Sunbringer even more than the first book, but in general I just love this kind of fairy tale-esque world building that we have. It does feel a bit like a retelling from just the writing style. So in this world we have big and small gods that can come into existence just by enough people believing in them and building temples for them. But ever since a young king has taken the throne, he has decided that there are too many gods, they have too much power, so he declared them forbidden, and he created this kind of job as a god killer where they go ahead and destroy the gods, destroy the temples, and hopefully rid the country of all gods. Now, most of the gods have been vanquished, and some of the last bigger gods and small gods have taken refuge in one city where the god killers can't really reach them. And now we follow Kissin, who is such a god killer. She has a very own reason for wanting to kill gods, because one of them killed her family and left her with a disability, and we follow her as she tries to kill a little god, only to notice that he's not bound to a temple like normal gods are, but he has bound himself to a little girl. And so Kissin is afraid that if she kills the god, she might also kill the kid, so she needs to find a way to separate those two in order for her to do her job. In order to do that, she hopes to find answers in the city where all the gods are still alive, and so we follow them on their journey to said city. But Kissin isn't the only character that we have the POV of. We also follow someone who's going on a journey with them, and we also have the POV of the little god itself, and we kind of see its reasoning why it wants to stay connected to this human, and maybe have like a POV of one of these gods that people feel threatened by, and it's actually the little god of white lies, so it is a very interesting POV to have. Now in the second one we do follow the same characters, but they do something that I normally don't like. They split up, and I usually don't like that, but in this instance I really like that we have multiple settings and we have multiple plot lines that might in the end come together a bit more, and I can't wait for the third book in the series to come out this year. It is one of my highly anticipated reads, and I had one moment in this where there's a big fight and there is this magic moment when magic is released, and I loved the way that it was described. It was one of my favorite moments. It just gave me goosebumps, and I was like, yes, I love that when there's like this one moment where a character just blooms into all their potential. So I really enjoyed this series. Next up we have a YA romance, and that is Check and Mate by Ellie Hazelwood. I've read books by this author before, but it was more of her adult stuff, and I did like them, but this one just is top-notch. I hope she writes more YA in the future. I know that she's coming out with a new adult debut, I think this year, but with this I just loved the family aspect, the reasoning behind the characters, decisions that they make, and I felt like the family aspect was one of the strongest points in this story. But also I do know how to play chess, but only like amateur level. But after reading this book I was really interested, especially finding out more about women in this environment and the criticism and the pushback that women get when they try to infiltrate this male dominant place. So we follow Mallory, and she used to be very good at chess, but it has been years since she played. There's a reason why she stopped playing, but now her friend asked her to come to a tournament with her as a favor to her. And so she goes and ends up playing the current world champion, and she wins. It is a crazy moment. Of course, everybody wants to know who she is and how she could have defeated this master player, and and that is kind of where the story starts, and she gets sucked back into this whole world of playing. And the love story is actually with Nolan, who is the current champion, and he is very much interested in getting her to play again. And I loved the love story in this. It is very sex positive, I do have to say, but it isn't as explicit on the page, so just know that going in. So this might also be for the romance girlies who don't want to have like steamy scenes. It is a very cute romance. Like I said, I love the family aspect. It is also just showing like what you have to do in order to find your place in this world that throws a lot of things at you. For example, for Mallory, it's that she has to take care of her family, and that just plays a very big role in this. I loved it. I flew through it, and like I said, I hope she writes more YA. I mentioned cozy fantasy before, and I will again. This is my favorite cozy fantasy of the year, and that is The Spell Shop by Sarah Beth Durst. Again, I read something by this author in the past and I enjoyed it. So when I saw this cover, I knew I had to try it, and it delivered on all fronts. This is about a librarian who's a very like big recluse. She just wants to be with the magic books that she tends to, with her best friend who's a talking plant. And she is kind of thrown into chaos when the library is attacked and starts to burn. So the only thing that she can do is take as many of these tomes with her that she can, and she and Kaz kind of have to flee to her home island, where she never really wanted to go back to. When she arrives on the island, she tries to stay like hidden and doesn't try to interact with anybody, but she soon finds herself getting more and more acquainted with her neighbors. One especially, there's a little love story going on there, but there's also so much found family and just belonging in this place and finding your own space in that place, and also kind of opening up to possibilities. Next to the whole cozy found family aspect, there is kind of like a plot in the background, because nobody's allowed to know that she has the magical tomes that she rescued from the library, because it's forbidden for anybody to have them. But she soon learns that she could use them to help her neighbors and friends, and so she opens up a shop where she sells marmalade in order for her to kind of in the background do a little bit of magic. This is cuteness overload. There are so many beautiful creatures in this. I loved Kaz, like his character, like the plant had so much sass and so great commentary on everything. I love the main character Kilo also. She is a woman of my own heart. I always love it when an introvert gets heard because there are so many misconceptions about why people would maybe prefer to be alone and maybe doesn't want to know too many people, and I feel like it was explained beautifully in this one, and I just flew through it. I love it. The only thing, I expected more winged cats to be in this one, and they were not. They were only there in the background, sometimes mentioned, but not so much in like the plot itself. So that, they knew how to get me, but I stayed for the plant. I spoke earlier about books that gave me like big emotions and maybe made me mad. And so here's another one, but one that also gave me very beautiful emotions and made me want to go back to this world, and that is There Is a Door in This Darkness by Kristen Cashore. This is the author who also wrote Bitter Blue, and now she went into a very different area but magical nonetheless. So this takes place during the pandemic, so if you don't like any mentioning of the pandemic or being back in that situation, be aware that this very much is still in the midst of it. In this we follow Wilhelmina, and she is still trying to come to terms with how the world has changed, that she can't meet her best friends anymore, that everybody's kind of isolating themselves, but at the same time you're kind of cooped up with your family and everybody's issues. And so it is very much a chaotic and world-changing time for this character, as we all probably can relate, because we've all been there, we've all lived through it, some in more or less dire circumstances and consequences. I felt very much for this character right from the get-go, just because of the situation and the explanations about where they're at during the pandemic. I was reminded a lot of about that time, and it was interesting to see how much of it we have already kind of forgotten about how we felt during that time. It's also interesting to see the difference between what I remember from that time living in Germany to what might have been in America at the time. Also, during that time, we all know that a certain former president-elect, had a very big impact on the situation during that time, and be aware that that is a big focus. He's not mentioned by name, but he is very much lording over the whole situation. And when I was reading it, that was kind of the reasoning why it didn't get a 5-star from me, because it was kind of hitting me over the head with commentary towards the political aspect of it. And I do realize a lot of people feel like that, and I do realize during that time it must have felt like that. Me reading it, it was just a bit too much at the time, but it probably is very much the same feeling that everybody has right now. So if you do want like a political statement towards this whole situation, you might want to pick this up. But what also makes this very special to me and why I want to reread it is because there is a magical component to it. I think going into it, I thought it would be a bigger magical component. I thought there would be more like magical plot in this, but it is very subtle. It is very much just a way of bringing people together. So don't go into this expecting this big magical plot. It's not. It's just very subtly in the background brought into this whole situation that felt out of this world anyway. So we have kind of a magical component where it brings the character closer to another person. And so I loved the way that that was described. If I would reread it now, that would probably be an even bigger and better reading experience, because I know how to go about it. if you know what I mean. So I loved this. This took me by surprise. I read it as an ebook and I had to get the physical copy because it is so good. Another book that took me by surprise and that I'm still hoping to get a physical copy of is Someone You Can Build a Nest In by John Wiswell. And the reason why I didn't right away get a copy of this is because there are 2 different covers. They have very different vibes, and I was kind of looking to see which one would fit more to my reading experience. And I'm gonna go ahead and try to get a copy of this cover because I feel like I like the style of the cover more, and I think that is the kind of feeling that I want to take away from my reading experience. And it is interesting because this is actually another genre blend, romance and horror, which I did not think is possible. It is actually a very like cozy horror-esque story. Again, something that I did not think existed until I read this. And the reason I read this is because Gavin, Gabby and Katie did a video about this, and I wanted to watch that video, but also I kind of knew that they loved it, so I wanted to read it before I go into the video. And I'm so glad that I did, because it is so wonderful and so weird and kind of disgusting going into the horror aspect of it, because you have this monster who falls in love with a human but at the same time stays a monster. And this is kind of where the body horror starts right from the get-go, because the main character Shishin, she creates her own body by ingesting things. Like she ingests maybe like a bear trap and that's her mouth, and then she ingests a corpse and takes some of that. So with all of these things that she gathers, she creates her own image, and she knows that she has a problem coming off as human because she's not, and she doesn't really have any way of knowing how a human would be. And so when there are hunters coming after her, she tries to kind of integrate herself into a human settlement, and there she meets Homily and falls in love with her. And it's so beautiful to see how she tries to become more human, but at the same time making sure that Homily understands what she as a monster needs and how she is, and Homily trying to understand that. So it is very weird. It is very dark at times, especially with the body horror. So if you don't like any of that, don't. I mean, the title alone says it all, because these kinds of monsters, they lay their eggs in someone they love, and that person is devoured by the offspring. So that is kind of where the title comes from. So it is a very different view, but I love that you have a monster that doesn't think like a human and that doesn't change because they fall in love, but both love interests just trying to understand the other and trying to make it work. and I loved it. And again, it's something that I want to come back to. Such a weird book. Such a weird book. If I remember, I'm going to link down below the video that the other 3 booktubers did, because it is such a fun video and they had a lot of fun with it. And speaking of weird books, let's talk about And the Sky Blood by S. Hati. This I did a video too, so I'm going to link that up above if I remember. And I remember not being the biggest fan when I started this book. And like I said before, like in the introduction about how I choose these books, this isn't a 5-star, it's a 4-star. It might become a 5-star on reread, because the reasoning behind my 4-star is that it took me a very long time to understand what's going on. It is a very complex world where one day the sky broke open, there's like a gash and it bleeds, and when it rains there's magic coming down, but magic that is very harmful to humans, and so it's very dangerous to collect it, but at the same time this is the only place in the world where there's any magic left. The rest of the magic has been mined and taken, so this is kind of the last resort. And again, with the strong emotions, this one, the ending, oh, the ending broke me. This is not a happy book. If you want a book where everything gets resolved happily, everybody survives, and everything gets like a bow tied around it, this is not the book for you. This hurts in the end. I cried, but I do want to say there is like a little slither of hope in the end, so you do get that. But at the same time, if you want a book where everything goes to shit and everybody is kind of doomed, go ahead. There is a commentary on colonialism, there's a commentary on how mankind has used up the earth, and the earth is kind of rebelling against them now, and I really enjoyed this. This is a debut author, and I do hope that they have another story in them, that they get published again, because this was such a unique read that I knew that I had to mention it here in my best of video. Okay, going from something very devastating to something that is actually a lot of fun while reading it, and that is So Let Them Burn by Camilla Cole. Not to say that this doesn't have commentary, it does, but it is also a lot of fun because we follow 2 sisters. They're still very young, but they have been to war, because a few years ago there was a war between the people who live on this island with the sisters, who worship gods, and the people from the mainland who try to occupy their island, and these people have dragon riders to fight for them. And in order to survive, the people from the island asked their gods for help, and the gods answered by choosing one girl, one of the sisters, Farron, to be the chosen one, to be their vessel in order to defeat the enemy. That was 5 years ago. Farron is now still a teenager. She doesn't really know what to do, not only with her powers, but with her future. She is kind of an outcast because of what she could do, what she did. Now there is supposed to be a peace meeting between the 2 countries, and the sisters are invited to be there because of the role that they played during the war. While they're there, everything changes because Farron's older sister Alara bonds with one of the enemy's dragons, which means that she now has to go to their country in order to learn to be a dragon rider, what it means, and what dragons are all about. It is a very high honor to be a dragon rider, so not everybody from the mainland is happy that she got this position. And also everybody on the island is kind of wondering what that means for them. For a lot of them, she is a traitor, she changes sides, and now there's this tension again between the island and the mainland, especially since there were people going to the peace meeting with other things in mind than peace. I loved it. I flew through this. I'm so happy that my sister gave me this book for my birthday. I really enjoyed having this double POV from both sides of the war and seeing how the kind of prejudice that both sides have towards the other side plays into it. I like that we have a love story on each side. One of them is queer. I really liked the representation of that. I did like the banter between these couples. Just like with Fate of the Fallen, this plays with the whole trope of the chosen one, because the chosen one was in the past. Now she has to find her own way through this war against her sister. Her loyalty is supposed to be to her country, to the gods that gave her this power, but Farron is asked to choose between her country and the gods and her sister, because everybody is inclined to believe that the only way to break a bond between a dragon and a dragon rider is to kill them. And now Farron has a very hard decision to make, and I love the exploration of that. And especially since I'm a sister, I just ate all of that up. Next up, we have a new favorite sci-fi series and another revelation to me because it's a novella series, and that is Beth Revis' Full Speed to a Crash Landing, as well as the sequel How to Steal a Galaxy. I had so much fun with these, and it just goes to show that small books can pack quite a punch, because these are action-packed. There is like a love story going on, there is intrigue, there is a plot behind the plot, and I love both books equally, even though in the second one we kind of get a bigger picture of everything. We get character development, and I had so much fun. And in this we follow Ada, who is trying to salvage a spaceship wreck in the middle of nowhere when she notices that, damn it, she's running out of oxygen. Luckily for her, a government spaceship is coming to do the exact same thing, find the wreckage, and they reluctantly save her from her doom and are not really happy with her being there because she's not supposed to be there. So now she has to try to get out of trouble with this government agent that is trying to find out why she's there in the first place, and also try to get the loot that she came for. And like I said, a lot of action. I love the banter. I just love the characters in general. I love how the series progressed during the first 2 installments, and I can't wait for the 3rd and final book to come out in the series this year. The next book is something that is very dear to my heart, and that is A Taste of Golden Iron by Alexandra Rowland. Sorry that it's kind of messed up right here, but nevertheless I loved the book itself. So in this we follow Prince Cadu, and his sister is the queen of the country, and as the prince he's supposed to be this worldly person who is good with people, who is good at being like a diplomat, but he does really struggle to fill this kind of position. He is more of an introvert, he wants to be more in the background, he doesn't really know how to interact with everybody because there are some things that he is kind of dealing with that nobody's allowed to know about, and so he really puts his foot in it at one point, and his sister has no other option but to confine him to his rooms in the palace and give him a babysitter to make sure that he stays there. And that babysitter is Evermare. He has just joined the guard. He was one of the best in his class and is now kind of irritated why he's supposed to be just this babysitter when he can do so much more. He had hoped for so much more. He is very ambitious, but of course he is one of the guards, so he doesn't really have the mindset of asking for more, of thinking he deserves more. He just goes where he's asked. And I loved the relationship that happens between these two, from reluctant bodyguard and very irritated babysat prince to reluctant acquaintances to maybe friends to maybe even more. And the reason why I love this with my whole heart is not because of some big plot. There is plot, but I feel like it does take a backseat to the character development in this one. And so we have Cadu, who is trying to regain his sister's trust, and so he's asked to look into something that happened at the port, and so he goes there and tries to figure out like what's going on. There's something amiss, there's kind of like a mystery to solve, but other than that there isn't really much plot, and even that plot is very thin at best. The same goes with the magic system in this. There is a bit of magic, but not really. It's more kind of historical fantasy in as that we have this love story between 2 characters who have different standings in society, and they both have to kind of overcome the roles that they are supposed to play. What I did love about this also is that we have a discussion about this kind of different power dynamic, because we have a prince and we have someone who is supposed to do his every bidding. So we do have this talk about reciprocity and what both of them get out of it, and I loved that in that moment we had a very vulnerable bodyguard, because usually you have like the bodyguard being the stoic, emotionless, powerful character, because mostly you have to kind of balance out the power that the prince has just from being born a prince. But with this I really like that you get the mindset of someone in that time period, in this situation. In this kind of situation, the bodyguard wouldn't expect to gain anything by this relationship. He wouldn't even consider thinking that he deserved more, and that he could ask for more. And I love that the prince in his higher position acknowledges that and is the one that is kind of pushing for both of them to be on eye level on this. So I love both characters. I love the discussion about mental health and toxic masculinity, and just the way that these two interact with each other. Like, every step of the way was so precious. And if anybody hurts these two, I'm gonna hurt those people, because they have my whole heart. There isn't much going on besides these characters, but those character moments are everything. But I also have to say, I love the relationship between Kadu and his sister. I love this family dynamic. She is the reason why he kind of is in the situation he's in the beginning, but she has a reason, and I really love how they interact throughout this. I love that she as a character is shown as this very powerful woman, but also as a mother and a wife, and what that means in this kind of situation. Loved it. The next 3 books were very much surprises for me, because I went into them thinking, yeah, okay, I'll try it, I'll give it a try, and they just grabbed me and wouldn't let me go. So the first one I'm going to talk about is The God and the Gumio by Sophie Kim. This, again, I read digitally, and then I decided which copy I wanted to get, and I love this cover, so I decided to go with this one because I feel like this makes so much sense for the story that we get. Like the title says, this is about a god and a gumiho, and they kind of are thrown together through circumstances in order to solve a crime. There are deaths happening, and everybody assumes that an old villain has come back. The infamous Scarlet Fox, a 9-tailed gumiho, is supposedly back and is devouring souls, something that the gumiho aren't allowed to do anymore ever since a massacre happened way back when, because of the Scarlet Fox. So the god Sokka is asked to look into it, and he has a very good reason why he wants to solve this case. He was kind of banished from the other realm of the gods because he led a rebellion. It failed, and now he's kind of stuck in the mortal realm until he can redeem himself. And he's told that if he solves this murder and finds the Scarlet Fox, then he has redeemed himself and can come home. But the higher ups think that he does need a little bit of help in order to solve this case, so they ask Kimhani, a gumiho, to help him solve this case. She herself has a very good reason as well for trying to find the killer, because she is the Scarlet Fox. She has retired after the massacre. She is not the one who's eating souls right now. So she is kind of wondering who's behind it and who's trying to frame me, and also how close is the god to actually figuring out not only who this culprit is, but also to finding her. So I love this kind of cat and mouse play between this legendary fox spirit and this god who has a very dark past as well. I love that both of these characters have a backstory, that they both have baggage, that they both have lived for a very long time. None of them are this very naive person just fresh into this supernatural world. No, both of these have dark pasts and have different reasons to being who they are right now in this moment. I love the banter between these two. I love how reluctant, especially the goddess, into this kind of partnership, and the mystery itself is a lot of fun to follow. I love this world building. I love that there's like a modern take to it. I loved it. I love that there's going to be a sequel coming out this year, and you bet I will read it right when it comes out. And I might even try to reread this one because it is so much fun. Also, floppy paperback. I love them. Like I said, these next 2 are also surprises, and this one especially, and that is Not My Problem by Kiara Smith. I was looking for something to recommend to our patrons on the bookstore, and the German translation of this just came out, and I was like, okay, I'll look into it. I'll just read the English one and just see if it's something that I want to present to our patrons. And I loved it. The humor in this is top notch. This is so much fun. We have a lot about friendship, about first love. It's a queer romance. It is a school setting, but at the same time we have some darker undertones. But yeah, just from the get-go, this had me, because the premise of this is that we follow Aideen, and she is kind of an outcast school. She just wants to skate by and just be left alone. But she's confronted one day by Maeve, who is her nemesis and who is kind of losing it. She's taken too much on. She is feeling the pressure of schoolwork and social activities and such, and she's goading Aideen and goading until Aideen lashes out and accidentally pushes her down the stairs. Now Maeve is hurt. Aideen is kind of freaking out, like, oh my god, I'm gonna get into trouble. What she doesn't expect is for Maeve to thank her, because now that she's kind of hurt, she can't do all the activities that she has to do because of her parents, and so now her problem seems to be solved. And from that moment on, Aideen gets this reputation of helping people, of being the person that you can go to if you have a problem that needs solving. So she finds herself reluctantly in the center of attention of her schoolmates. The only thing that she asks in return is that they owe her something. What I love about this is that they don't owe her like money, or that she doesn't think about herself. She uses the IOUs in order to help the next person that comes and asks for help. So I love that aspect, and I love how that way everybody's kind of roped into helping the next person in line. So there is like a lot of friendships that are springing up. This also has one of my favorite characters. His name is Gabby, and he's kind of the one who's bringing people to Aideen for her to help them. He's always like popping up everywhere, and he's trying to find friends, and so she reluctantly agrees, like, yeah, okay, I'm your friend, but really, like, what are you doing here? I love this from the beginning to end. This had the right amount of serious topics, but also just fun moments that kind of reminded me of like the typical teen movie that you would have, where they're trying to sneak someone out to get to a party and so on. So you have problems that are real problems and problems that are just fun little moments in time. At the same time, there is a reason why she wants to concentrate on other people's problems and not her own. So if you're looking for a fun, friendship-centric but also kind of queer rom-com story, this might be for you. The next 3 books or book series that I'm gonna mention, they have a special place in my heart. Like I said, a lot of these are interchangeable, like the list isn't set in stone with all the spots, but I feel like the next 3 books that I'm gonna mention are my top 3. And the first thing, and I mentioned that this one is a surprise as well, not only because of how much I enjoyed this when I had no expectations at all going into this, but also again because it's a short book. And that is When Among Crows by Veronica Roth. This, I mean, I normally don't like novellas. I have a hard time loving characters if I don't have a lot of room to be in their world, and this is only 160 plus pages. Is that enough time? Mostly I would say no. But with this, Veronica Roth made every word count. There is so much action. I love the backstory. I love the inspiration. There's inspiration from Slavic folklore. You have like this search for Baba Yaga, and you have different supernatural beasts that you might know from Slavic legends, like the Smay. And you have a demon hunter, a monster hunter who has to infiltrate his enemies in order to find the biggest target that he is looking for, Baba Yaga. And I love how it all turns out. I loved every second of it. I can't even go into too much detail because it's so short. Just know that you have monsters, you have humans doing monstrous things, you have curses, you have witches, you have magic, you have fights, you have love, you have intrigue, you have backstabbing, you have plot twists, you have all the good things in 160 pages. I love that she can come with this short story and bring everything that I want from a magical supernatural retelling. Second place goes to a book that I read very early in the year, and I'm very much ashamed that I have not continued on with the series. That is a high priority for me this year, but that is The Serpent and the Wings of Night by Clarissa Broadbent. This, I think, from all the books that I mentioned, like at the top of my list, I think this has been the one that is on most other people's lists as well, because it had such a big impact on the community. And this is about a world where vampires rule and humans are basically just their food source and their servants and their slaves. And we follow Oriah, who is the adopted human daughter of the vampire king, and even though she has a high position in this society, she still needs to survive day by day, and the only hope that she sees is by going into this kind of Hunger Games situation where the winner gets kind of an IOU from the goddess of night, the goddess of death. So she enters this tournament knowing that she will be the only human, everybody else will be a vampire. They will be bloodthirsty, she's probably gonna die, and the only way that she might have even like the slightest chance is to get some alliances, and hopefully she can survive all that is gonna be thrown at her. I loved it. I love the world. I love her backstory as being like an adoptive daughter. I love her relationship with her adoptive father because it is very intricate, and I loved how it was handled. I love that she kind of has to rely on someone who she doesn't think she can trust and who might backstab her, and I love the love story in this one. I love that it is very slow burn. I love that we don't have insta-lust in this one. I love that we kind of get to be with these characters while they might catch feelings, and yeah, I don't know why I haven't picked up the sequel yet. Shame on me, I should have done that right when it came out. And now I get to talk about my favorite book and book series of the year, because the first spot is taken up by 2 books, because I was stupid enough to have the ARC for the first book when it came out in 2023, and I didn't read it until 2024. I was so mad at myself, but at the same time I was glad because that meant that I didn't have to wait long for the conclusion of the story, and so I read that when it came out and I wasn't disappointed. This duology is perfection. I love it. I will not stop talking about it, and I will probably recommend it every time someone asks for a great fantasy book, and that is The Scarlet Alchemist and The Blood Orchid by Kylie Lee Baker. When I tell you this is perfection, I mean it's perfection. It has everything that I mentioned before that I learned about my reading taste this year. It has Chinese retelling, it has an alternate reality. So we have this kind of historical world, but with the caveat that in this world, alchemists actually learned to deliver the Philosopher's Stone by turning other material into gold that the rich can eat and stay basically immortal. So in this world, the highest position that you can have is to be the royal alchemist, because that person knows the secret to making more gold. So in the Scarlet Alchemist, we follow Zilan, and her goal is to become the royal alchemist. But for now, she is kind of stuck in a small, impoverished town, living with her aunt and uncle and her cousins. They are her family, they are everything to her, and the only way that she can contribute to the family is to do kind of an illegal magic, a kind of illegal form of alchemy where she can raise the dead. So she enters a competition to find the next royal alchemist. She is not in a position to really hope for surviving the next couple of weeks and months, because she's not only a woman in a field that is mostly men, but also she's only half Chinese. Her father was a foreigner. He left a long time ago. She doesn't really know much about him. Her mother has died, and that is kind of how she ended up living with her relatives. She loves her cousins. They are following her to the capital because they themselves also have high aspirations to become scholars at the court, and so they all move to the capital, and we follow Zilan while she's taking part in the competition. She of course is hoping to not be found out as someone who deals with the dead. Nobody's allowed to know what she can do, but it seems like somebody has found out and asks her for help. And this person is none other than the Crown Prince himself. Something that I recently noticed that I enjoy is that the idea of this competition is something that transcends all cultures. But mostly when we have it in Western inspired literature, we have kind of like a Hunger Games situation where it is kind of a punishment for someone to take part in said competition or fight. And I noticed in Asian inspired books, we have that competition aspect, but a lot of the times it is about people fighting for a position. It is about everybody showing what they can do in a certain profession. And I love both of those tropes. So I love the kind of Hunger Games-esque story like we've seen with The Serpent and the Wings of Night, but I also love this kind of profession-based competition where we get to see her being badass as a woman and showing everybody that just because she's different, just because she might stand out, she can still deliver. And I love her as a character. Also, this series has so many plot twists. My jaw was on the floor. Like the revelations in the end, oh my god, I did not see those coming. The decisions that are made in the end, I was sitting there, I was like, no, she's not. She's not gonna do that. Oh my god, why is she doing that? What? I need the sequel, I need the sequel. And then when I read the sequel, it was just as good. I loved every aspect of this. I love the way that it concludes the story. I love the love story in this, but really it's also about family and family bonds and what you would do for the people you love, be it familial love, be it platonic love, or be it the love you feel for a love interest. It has an amazing magic system. It has court politics. It has backstabbing. It has friendship. It has family. It has everything that you might want from an amazing story. And I love how Kylie Lee Baker put it all together in this amazing plot. And I read her debut novel that came before this series, and I enjoyed that as well. It has very much another kind of retelling character, more like fairy tale-esque than this. And I am reading right now her debut in a kind of horror contemporary genre, so that is great as well. Please check these out. They are amazing. By far my favorite reads of the year. I don't know why there isn't much more talk about this book. I don't know why nobody else seems to have this on their radar. So it's my mission to get this book into as many hands as possible. There has been talk about only seeing the same books on everybody's best of lists, that everybody's only reading the same books, that everybody's hyping up the same books. And I feel like a lot of my best of books aren't mentioned in other people's lists. I do hope that you found some inspiration from these recommendations, but if you heard me talk about what I like in books and have recommendations for me, I would love to read those in the comments down below. Let me know some of your favorite books of the year, and until the next time, I hope you have all the great reads. Bye!